Welcome to our podcast where we explore health, culture, and equity in healthcare. I'm Kayla, a nursing student passionate about Indigenous health and holistic healing.
And I am Disha, an Indigenous health advocate and cultural educator. Today, we are diving into the influential film The Unforgotten and discussing how it connects to Indigenous detriments of health and holistic healing. Also, we're going to share our personal reflections and how this film impacts our future nursing practice.
Right, and we'll also bring in insights from the book Determinants of Indigenous Peoples' Health Beyond the Social, which gives an in depth look on how colonialism, healthcare barriers, and cultural knowledge shape Indigenous health outcomes. So, Disha, let's start with the film's big message. What moment from The Unforgotten stood out to you the most?
One scene that really hit me was when the narrator says, "We are not statistics, we are not forgotten, our stories deserve to be heard."
Oh, yes, that was such an incredibly powerful statement that stuck with me as well.
This moment captured the entire theme of seeing person. It reminds me that Indigenous patients are more than medical cases. They have histories, cultural identities, and intergenerational experiences that impact their health.
It made me think about how the healthcare system often overlooks Indigenous patients as whole individuals. That's exactly what Seeing Person teaches us to look beyond just symptoms and recognize the deeper social, emotional, and historical factors affecting Indigenous health. One of the most heartbreaking parts of the film was seeing Indigenous patients struggling to access healthcare. That really connects to the concepts of Indigenous determinants of health. What are some of the biggest barriers you saw in the film?
One huge barrier was how Indigenous people are treated in hospitals. There's a moment in the film where a man describes going to the ER and being ignored for hours. This is a great example of systemic racism in the healthcare system. They saw an Indigenous man in a wheelchair, and instead of recognizing his deteriorating condition, they assumed he was intoxicated or simply seeking shelter. This man was Brian Sinclair, an Anishinaabe man who died in Winnipeg ER after waiting 34 hours without care.
Sinclair was never properly assessed or triaged by the medical professionals. It really does highlight the devastating consequences of systemic racism and neglect in healthcare. Another story that really stuck with me in this film is that of Sonny James McDonald. I really liked the animation they added into this story so we could visualize what actually happened to him in this hospital. He was just a child when he was sent away for tuberculosis treatment, but instead of healing, he was stripped of his dignity. No visitors, no warmth, just cold hospital walls and silence.
And he was physically restrained, forced into isolation like a prisoner, not like a patient. Imagine being a scared child, taken from your family only to be locked away in a place that was supposed to help you. That's not medicine, that's cruelty.
And if that wasn't horrifying enough, Sonny also suffered sexual abuse at the hands of the hospital orderly. It forces us to ask how many Indigenous voices have been silenced in these places of so called healing. Another major theme in the film is the lasting impact of colonialism. Many people see things like residential schools as part of the past, but their effects continue to shape Indigenous health today. Was there a moment in the film that really stood out to you?
What struck me the most was the story of a woman whose mother was forcibly sterilized in 1970s. That's not ancient history, it's disturbingly recent. Even more shocking cases of forced sterilization of indigenous women have been reported as recently as 2018, proving that these violations are not just remnants of the past but ongoing injustice.
It's heartbreaking to see the scars of colonialism still run deep in our healthcare system. The fact that Indigenous women are still being subjected to forced sterilization is gut wrenching. It's a heavy burden we must confront. This isn't just a dark chapter in history, it's an ongoing violation of human rights. Alright, let's focus on solutions. What can healthcare professionals, students like us, and allies do to help improve Indigenous health outcomes?
The first step is education. Learn from indigenous voices. Read books by indigenous authors, listen to elders, and seek out cultural safety training. The book we refer for our course, Determinants of Indigenous Peoples' Health, second edition, Beyond the Social, edited by Margot Greenwood, Sarah and Nico Lindsay, published in April 2018, mentioned reconciliation requires non Indigenous people to take responsibility for learning, unlearning, and relearning.
I completely agree. Education is the foundation for change. Although learning is a great start, it isn't enough. We need to apply what we learned in real life situations. It's one thing to say you understand and sympathize, but we need to actually show this in our actions too. Healthcare workers and allies must actively challenge biases, speak up when they see discrimination, and advocate for systemic changes that improve Indigenous health outcomes.
You're right, Kayla. Reconciliation isn't just about understanding history, it's about making sure the mistakes of the past don't keep repeating. So let's start with us in our roles as future nurses and healthcare professionals.
Let's dive deeper into something we mentioned earlier: how traditional healing can be incorporated into modern healthcare. There's a scene in the Unforgotten film where an elder speaks about the power of ceremony. How important do you think it is to bring these cultural traditions into hospitals and clinics?
It's absolutely essential. Many indigenous patients feel disconnected in Western healthcare settings because they don't have access to traditional medicines, ceremonies, or spiritual practices. One of the leading authors, Mylena Rodriguez, in the article of Cultural Survival narrates, healing goes beyond medicine. It's about reclaiming identity, restoring harmony, and reconnecting with cultural knowledge.
I love that perspective. It really shows that healing isn't just about treating the body, it's about honoring the whole person. When Indigenous patients are given space for ceremony, prayer, or smudging, it helps them feel recognized and valued in the healthcare system.
Exactly. Some hospitals in Canada now have dedicated Indigenous healing spaces, but we need to expand these efforts. Traditional medicine shouldn't be seen as separate or secondary to Western treatments. It should be integrated as a respected and complementary part of patient care.
All right, Disha, let's talk about real, tangible steps towards reconciliation in healthcare. Both the book and the film make it clear reconciliation isn't just about recognizing the past, it's about taking meaningful action. What do you think healthcare institutions should be prioritizing?
Indigenizing healthcare isn't just about checking a box with land acknowledgement. It's about a real systemic change. As Walker and Ben Smith in 2018 emphasized, it means actively hiring, mentoring, and uplifting Indigenous professionals in medicine. It's about making space, amplifying their voices, and ensuring Indigenous leadership shapes the future of youth healthcare.
That's such a powerful point. Representation isn't just symbolic, it directly impacts patient trust. When Indigenous patients see healthcare providers who understand their culture, traditions, and lived experiences, they feel safer, respected, and more likely to seek care without fear of discrimination.
Exactly. And another crucial step is mandatory cultural safety training in hospitals and medical schools. It's easy to say you support reconciliation, but true commitment means ensuring that every healthcare professional understands Indigenous history, the ongoing impact of colonialism, and how systemic racism still affects patient outcomes today.
Absolutely. And I'd add one more piece: policy reform. Acknowledging past harms is important, but without concrete changes, it's just talk. Hospitals and healthcare systems need to institutionalize reconciliation by guaranteeing Indigenous patients access to both Western medicine and traditional healing practices as part of their standard care. Thank you for joining us in our reflection and breakdown of The Unforgotten. It isn't just a film, it's a reminder of the voices that must be heard, the truths that must be acknowledged, and the change that must happen.
And as future nurses, we have a responsibility to see, to listen, and to advocate because no one should ever feel forgotten in a place of healing. So let's make sure that in the future, stories like Sony's
And Stella's
are
are
never
never
repeated.
repeated.